Okay, you ready for a spicy hot take? I think Secret Invasion by Marvel Studios is a terrible adaptation of the source material. I also think that that might be one of its greatest strengths. Welcome, one and all, to a Knights of the Nerds Table editorial. See? It's not just previews and me droning on about comics trivia. So like, subscribe, and let's go ahead and chat about the Marvel Cinematic Universe's newest entry. So as of the writing of this video, Marvel has released the first episode of Secret Invasion, starring Samuel L. Jackson, Kobe Smulders, and Ben Mendelsohn. And if this episode is anything to go off of, it's gonna be really good. The episode doesn't hit the highs for me that, say, WandaVision or She-Hulk hit, but it's a strong opener. The episode does a really good job of establishing a tense scenario with antagonists with extremely understandable motives, and it ends on an absolutely brutal cliffhanger. All in all, I'd give it, say, a 7.5 out of 10. But like I said at the start of the video, it is a terrible adaptation of the comics from which it takes its name. The comic Secret Invasion originally came out in 2008 and was written by Brian Michael Bendis with art from Leinil Francis Yu. The story takes place in the aftermath of the superhero Civil War, when Marvel's superhuman community had been torn in two. This tension was further heightened by the discovery that the assassin Elektra had been replaced by a Skrull imposter that couldn't be detected by either Tony Stark's technology or Wolverine's heightened senses. The story was advertised in pretty much the same way that the show is being advertised now, prioritizing a sense of paranoia and distrust. But in practice, it was largely just another big superhero blowout, with the Skrulls initiating a multi-pronged, open invasion of Earth. As with any good superhero story, the heroes end up saving the day, although at the end Norman Osborn does leverage his role in the events to become head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Overall, the story is considered fine. General consensus a decade later is that while the story and the action are fun and the introduction of the Secret Warriors is a really interesting new group of characters, it suffers from needless conflict between the heroes and doesn't live up to the potential of its "the enemy could be anyone" premise. And ultimately, that's what's making Secret Invasion, the TV show, so interesting to me. Essentially, outside of being about Skrull infiltrators, these stories have nothing to do with each other. The show is a tense spy thriller, while the comic is a flashy action blockbuster. The comic features a huge cast of characters, bigger than even Avengers Endgame, while the show focuses pretty much exclusively on Nick Fury. And the action in the show is so grounded with tense hand-to-hand combat and gunplay, while the action in the comic are these large-scale, middle-of-Manhattan superhero battles with everybody's powers flying everywhere. Even the antagonists are wildly different. In the show, the Skrulls are made up of refugees, tired of waiting for Fury and Danvers to find them a home, and choosing to make the Earth their home by force. Meanwhile, the Skrull infiltration in the comics was a group of religious extremists who believed that they were religiously mandated to make the Earth their new homeworld by force. It was the mid-2000s, it's just kind of what we were thinking about at the time. Really, by any metric, Marvel Studios' Secret Invasion is a bad adaptation, or at least a very unfaithful one. But despite that, I'm enjoying it more than I enjoyed the comic, which kind of led me to thinking, is faithfulness of adaptation a useful way to assess the quality of an adaptation? Take Hugh Jackman, for example. Hugh Jackman is a 6-foot-something, deeply handsome Australian with a gorgeous tenor. And yet, his casting as Wolverine, who is, in the comics, an ugly 5'3" hairball of a Canadian, is considered to be definitive to the point of being irreplaceable. Or, taken one step further, consider Stephen Amell's portrayal of Oliver Queen. Amell's Oliver is a gruff, vengeful loner with little interest in politics, even in the season where he runs for mayor. He has way more in common with Bruce Wayne than comics Oliver Queen, who is a charming, talkative adventurer with a vested interest in social issues. Despite that, while Arrow tends to be overall hit or miss, I hardly ever hear anyone speaking ill of Amel's performance on the grounds of faithfulness. Basically, both performances are extremely unfaithful, but are widely considered to be excellent. There are examples of the reverse as well. Zack Snyder's Watchmen is practically a shot-for-shot remake of the comic up until the ending. It's visually extremely faithful, but despite that, the film is regularly derided for, well, all the usual reasons folks deride a Zack Snyder film. It was extremely faithful, but overall, poorly received. Because of this, I've kind of come to the conclusion that whether or not an adaptation is faithful doesn't really have any intrinsic bearing on the quality of the adaptation or whether I'm going to enjoy it. But we always bring it up. And by we, I do mean us here at Knights of the Nerds table. If you ever tune into our live streams, which you should, but they're a lot of fun, you will always catch me talking with great interest about how faithful a comic book movie is or isn't. It's frequently used in discussions all over the internet, often as a gotcha in some Twitter flame war. And while I can't speak for anyone but me, I think that the reason that I focus on faithfulness of adaptation is because of how much I love the source material and I try to advocate for it. Whether I like it or not, comic books are still a niche interest, although their adaptations definitely aren't. I fully believe that every new comic adaptation is a chance to make a new comic fan. And the last thing I want is for that new fan to open the source material of their favorite Marvel movie and have it be a completely alien experience. Take Infinity War, for example. If you don't note the major differences in plot between the film and comic to a new reader, they will be wildly confused about why Adam Warlock is floating around and why Drax is basically a poor man's version of the Hulk. I also think that it's worth discussing the faithfulness of an adaptation to see what it can teach us about the process of adaptation itself. Look at cases like Runaways, which simultaneously removes Molly Hayes' parents from the narrative while expanding the role of the remaining members of the Pride. Or X-Men: The Last Stand, where the alien nature of the Phoenix is completely excised from the plot. Learning about what motivates these decisions can teach us a lot about how the creators viewed the source material or how the industry adapting the work is operating. In the case of Secret Invasion, what we've already learned about the differences is interesting. Director Ali Salim explained that he was discouraged from even reading the comics in preparation for the show. As Salim says, "When I took this job, the first thing Marvel said to me was, 'Don't read the comics. They have nothing to do with this series.' The series was born out of the electric relationship that was created between Nick Fury and Talos, or Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn, in Captain Marvel. Marvel just wanted to cue off of that and make a story that talked more about the nuances of where terrorists come from or where psychopaths come from and less about just bad guy, good guy." Now, you can interpret a lot from this, but right off the bat, this tells me that more and more Marvel is moving towards creating their own stories and relying on the strength of their brand name to carry them without a base story. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does concern me as a comic fan. Seeing the work that James Gunn is doing at DC, directly citing sources and creators and encouraging people to pick up the books, has been super exciting for me. And this feels like the opposite of that. It makes it feel like Secret Invasion isn't an adaptation at all, but rather an original piece of spy fiction with a brand name slapped on it. Of course, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like I've said, I'm enjoying Secret Invasion so far. The changes that they're making seem to be very pragmatic and so far have been executed extremely well. I think it's probably even better than its namesake. I just wish Marvel would do more to encourage folks to engage with the comics that I love so much. One thing's for sure, Adaptations tend to bring out strong emotions in people. After all, you always want to see your favorite stories reach a new audience, and for that audience to fall in love with them the way that you did. That can't happen if the adaptation doesn't have the same magic as the original story. But I hope that I've demonstrated that just because changes or variations are made doesn't mean that they have to be bad, and in fact, they can be just as interesting. I think the key to a great adaptation is not adherence to the original story, but rather love for the original story, and a strong sense of pragmatism. But you tell me, what do you think makes for a great adaptation? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time for more conversations around the Nerds Table.